Welcome back to the Murder Tapes Podcast, Season 5, Episode 2. As you all know, I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin, and I finally decided to apply to grad school this past week. So I've been looking into different programs, and it's just been very time-consuming, so I apologize for my absence. I do have some fun news, though. I'll be hosting a pop-up soon with stickers for the podcast here in Austin. I'm also going to be giving out makeup and skincare that some brands have sent over, so make sure you're following the podcast's Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast for updates. Aside from that, I hope you all had a great week, and today we're going to be talking about the Carl Tanzler case. Carl Tanzler, originally named George Carl Tanzler, was born in Dresden, Germany on February 8, 1877. Throughout his childhood, he experienced dreams of a deceased ancestor named Countess Anna Constantia von Cosel. In these visions, Anna is said to have revealed to Carl the face of his true love. Interestingly enough, there isn't a lot of information on his background because he often invented different ones and changed them. Carl claims that he traveled to both Australia and India. And while there, he claims he did electrical work, bought boats, purchased a South Seas island, and built a trans-ocean flying plane during World War I. He also claimed that he had 9 university degrees and would go around town with a cane and wristwatches, claiming they were commissioned to him by the Tsar of Russia. After the 20th century, Carl moved to Australia. In an autobiographical note included in a story for the 1939 edition of the Rosicrucian Digest, he mentioned that he was residing in Australia when World War I began. Due to his German background, he was placed in a concentration camp for safekeeping. After the war, he went back to Germany, where he married Doris Schaefer and welcomed 2 children in the early 1920s. By 1926, Carl chose to relocate his family to America, and they established themselves in Zephyrhills, Florida. The next year, he took a position as a radiology technician in the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West, leaving his wife and children behind to move south. Just 3 years later, he would catch a glimpse of the woman that was in his childhood dreams. Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos was born in 1909. She was the daughter of a cigar maker named Francisco Pancho Hoyos and his wife Aurora Milagro from Key West. She was a Cuban American, and she was a teenager in the 1920s. She enjoyed Rudolph Valentino movies, cooking for her friends and family, and dancing at La Brisa, a social club near her. She was a devout Catholic, and everyone that knew her said she was very beautiful, great at singing, and very shy. She was actually a pretty popular singer. In fact, people would ask for pictures with her when she was on the street. Her sister died from tuberculosis, and her brother-in-law was electrocuted on a construction site. She would then go on to marry Luis Mesa at the age of 16 in 1926. Unfortunately, their marriage deteriorated after Maria experienced a miscarriage, prompting Luis to relocate to Miami, leaving her in Key West. Maria was later diagnosed with tuberculosis herself, and her family initially assumed she was sick because of the loss of her child. Tuberculosis was a very prominent cause of death during this time, especially in cigar factories where her father worked. On April 22, 1930, she entered the U.S. Marine Hospital for treatment, where she met a German radiologic technologist named Carl Tanzler, who was 53 years old at the time, while she was just 20. Carl liked to refer to himself as Count Carl von Cosel. Once again, it's important to note that he wasn't actually a count. In fact, his wife and other family members would state he had no royal lineage, and all of his quote-unquote medical degrees, licenses, and medals were all forged. Although Carl focused on radiology, he became devoted to healing young Maria, whom he believed was destined to be his one true love. He thought that she looked just like the woman that was in his dreams. He even took X-ray equipment to her home in an effort to provide treatment there. Over the following 18 months, Carl lavished Maria with gifts of jewelry and clothing, repeatedly declaring his love for her, even though she was still legally married to Luis and he had a wife and children back in Zephyrhills. He also bought her a mahogany bed that would eventually be her deathbed. Despite his relentless pursuit, Maria never shared the same feelings. She would tell him he was too old for her, and that she was still married. Her sister would say in an interview, quote, "Maria never loved Carl. She was only nice to him because my mother told her she should be kind to those who were kind to her. She looked upon him as a grandfather, and when he proposed marriage, she always told him, 'You are too old.' Why? You are old enough to be my grandfather. What's more, I do not love you." He became so persistent that we asked him to stay away from the house. Tragically, Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos passed away from her illness on October 25, 1931, at the age of 22 years old. It was rumored that he may have poisoned her to ease her suffering. Carl covered the cost of her funeral and insisted on buying an expensive mausoleum in Key West Cemetery for her final resting place. Over the following 2 years, Carl made it a point to visit Maria each evening. He often serenaded her grave with her beloved Spanish songs, and it's said that while he sang, he could hear Maria's spirit calling to him, urging him to bring her back to his home. He would leave gifts at her grave and even installed a telephone line to her crypt so that he could continue speaking to her. Carl would ask her family if he could pay them $20 a month, or $345 in today's money, to stay in her room. On a dark April evening in 1933, Carl Tanzler stealthily entered Key West Cemetery and took Maria's body from her tomb. After nearly 2 years, her corpse had deteriorated significantly. He used a toy wagon to transport her remains to his home, where he began the grim task of attaching her limbs to her torso with piano wire to maintain the form. He replaced her decaying skin with silk soaked in wax and plaster, crafted a wig from the hair that had fallen from her skull, and used disinfectants and perfume to mask the stench of decay. The hair was actually given to him by Maria's mom at her funeral. Carl dressed Maria in a wedding gown after stuffing her body cavity with rags and kept her in his bed, sleeping beside her every night. He also engaged in necrophilia by inserting a tube into her vagina. Sperm was also found inside of her corpse. For 7 years, Carl cohabited with Maria's body. Eventually, rumors began to circulate when someone claimed to have seen him dancing with the corpse through an open window. Maria's family opted to confront him in October of 1940. Her sister alerted the police, who soon validated her suspicions. Carl was arrested and charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, as reported by Atlas Obscura. Stealing her corpse was actually not illegal during this time. A psychiatric assessment concluded that Carl was competent to stand trial, even though he testified that he wished to take Maria, quote, high into the stratosphere so that radiation from outer space could penetrate her tissues and restore life to her somnolent form. However, the statute of limitations for his crime had expired at the time of his arrest, leading to his release. Surprisingly, many expressed compassion for him, with some women viewing him as a tragic, albeit eccentric, romantic. Meanwhile, Maria's body was displayed at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, where nearly 7,000 visitors came to see the decayed remains. Teachers would bring their students on field trips to see her, and journalists would come by to write about the story. And some people even recommended that they keep her in a glass case as a permanent exhibit. She was ultimately put in an unmarked grave at Key West Cemetery. Carl went back to his wife in Zephyr Hills, yet his obsession with Maria persisted. He wrote an autobiography called Fantastic Adventures in 1947 that appeared in Pulp magazine. I'm now going to read some of the pages and include a link in the show notes for you guys to read the rest if you'd like. I'm gonna start with the preface first. When in November 1940 I was finally released from prison, I was a very bitter man. Charges had been brought against me that I was a violator of the grave, a ghoul, a fiend of society. There was an avalanche of misrepresentations, of sensational press stories which accused me of being a sexual pervert, a necromancer, a maniac, while being confined for court hearing. Worst of all, they had removed Maria's body, which I had treated, first to preserve it in its unearthly beauty, and then to reunite it with its soul, which was always with me in the scientific efforts of over 7 years. What made these misfortunes even heavier was the fact that, at the time of my release, I was 64 years old and had lost my employment through Roosevelt's retrenchment I had lost my home on the beach of Florida, which had been destroyed by hoodlums before my captivity, and with the war restrictions, found myself almost without means of existence. With my whole life thus deranged, I lived for a time as a recluse amongst the rubble of my laboratory, using the airplane which I had built for Maria as a shelter. But then a strange and unexpected turn of affairs brought me back to life. I discovered that there was human decency left in this world. From all parts of America and even from foreign countries, hundreds of letters poured in and thousands of visitors came to see me, not from idle curiosity, but from humane sympathy. In their eyes, I had not committed a crime. Gradually, faith recovered and hope returned into my heart. I decided that it was my duty to answer comprehensively those thousands of questions I had been asked in connection with my life and my love for Maria. I decided that it was also my duty to clear myself in the eyes of the public of the false accusations which had been raised. In short, I found it necessary to tell my story to remove this specter of ignorance. I'm now going to start off by reading from page 47. When I was just scrolling through this book and just reading tiny snippets, this is what really stood out to me, because if you've ever watched the You series, Joe Goldberg speaks to himself in his head the same way that Carl does. And it's super eerie because it's like you're reading exactly what he was thinking and doing. But it's very interesting to read, so that's where we're going to start. It's labeled Elena's Liberation. Just remember that that is part of her name, so if I refer to her as Maria or Elena, just know it's the same person. At last, the new moon had come. The night was pitch dark, and promises to the dead are sacred and must be kept. It was Saturday, and most people were walking around town, busily engaged shopping and going to shows at 8 o'clock. I waited till 8:30 and then went to my little workshop, opening the window wide into the cemetery. I suspended the little wagon out over the fence from the window, also 2 rubber cushions and a couple of short towing ropes. I then darkened the room, leaving open and locking the door behind me. I went out into the cemetery through that little street gate. I walked through the proper lanes between the graves until again I reached my window. I took the wagon down from the fence along with the other things hanging there, put everything into the wagon, and began pulling it along easily in the grass. But when it developed a very annoying way of rattling, I picked it up with its contents and carried it in my arms all the rest of the way to the tomb. The only illumination came from across the street. I unlocked the door of the tomb, and leaving the door wide open, I went down inside and spoke a few words into the coffin valve. "Darling, I have come to fulfill my promise to you. Sleep now. Sleep now, darling, gently for a while until you are with me. God bless you." I'm gonna start skipping different parts of the pages just because a lot of them don't have the detail that I want you to hear. Another paragraph starts off by saying, "My darling was now outside, ready and waiting the journey. Everything had gone well so far. With perfect ease, I lifted the casket up on my little toy wagon, 1 foot high, with the rubber cushions on each end, the blanket and crucifix covering the whole and partly trailing on the grass. It really was a wonderfully lovely journey through this black night, along between the rows of graves, with my sweetest bride in her little metal chamber. Oh, it was immensely joyful and sweet, never to be forgotten. Her wish had been fulfilled, and as Easter was close at hand, I made everything nice and cozy in her cabin. Her garments, bridal dress, veil, flowers and jewels, shoes, stockings, everything was at hand, with plenty of money too. What more could my dearest girl wish for, or have need of now?" The next part I'm going to read is about how he felt when he was taking her out of her grave. So this part is super disturbing, just be aware of that. "My poor darling, how you have been neglected. Of course you could not help yourself and no one came to your aid. May God forgive me if I could not come to your aid in time to save you earlier. In your plight, your beautiful eyes broke and sank without anyone coming to bring you help. Your beautiful dress, it has decayed, and now it mars your beauty. My very soul was tortured when I saw her awful condition. I resolved that I would help her out of this awful mess at once. She was my beloved bride. My promise to take care of her was a sacred one. With the greatest care, I now detached the uppermost layers, which were overgrown and eaten up with slimy molds. I then got a large bucket and deposited rags into it until it was filled. Carefully peeling off all pieces around the head, face, and chest first, I found that many pieces had become glued to the skin, all of those which did not come off easily. I left on her body to soak for the time being, as it might injure her delicate skin, which I wanted to keep intact. The bucket was heaping full and heavy. It had to be removed quickly as the odor was overpowering. Then I prepared some soap solution and wetted all places and surfaces where rags were adhering to her body. Little by little, the pieces loosened and came off, but not all of them that first night. Again and again, I washed her body, tilting it carefully, first on one side, then on the other, so as to wash the back and remove the rags from underneath. I also removed all uncleanliness from the floor of the casket. The bucket filled up once more and had to be taken out. When coming back, I rinsed her body and also the inside of the coffin thoroughly, but I used phenol solution this time for disinfecting and to remove the last traces of odor. After that, I dried her entire body, drained the coffin, and sponged it clean and dry. I placed new rubber cushions all along her body, which was firmly held together and still showed evidence of living loveliness. For the first time now, I could find a little time to rest, to examine her body and study its condition more thoroughly. I looked into the deep fallen cavities of the eyes like deep empty black holes. I saw her dried up lips, slightly parted with her white teeth gleaming between them. And when looking so long and deep into those black openings, where once her beautiful eyes shone so bright, it was strange indeed. It seemed as if a pair of pupils were forming again, deep inside, and were looking at me as from the bottom of a well straight and seriously. And then I heard her soft voice speak into my ear. "Now you will love me no more, will you?" These words cut into my heart like an arrow. They set me on fire with sacred love for her. I assured her, "Darling, I love you more than ever before. If it were not so, I would not have taken you to me." Then, kissing her dry lips and breathing deeply into her lungs until her bosom rose, I unpacked her bridal gown and covered her body with it. I draped her with a silk veil and adorned her head and hair with a golden crown. She looked so wonderful now, I could not resist the wondrous spell, and trembling with burning love, I sank gently into the coffin to her and kissed her as if she were still alive. So that's the last part that I'm going to read, but as I mentioned earlier, there will be a link in the show notes if you would like to keep reading. Reading each line, I really just felt like I was in the room with him, so it's just a very odd experience. Carl became a US citizen in Tampa in 1950, and he also asked her family if her body could be returned to him, but the judge denied this request and screamed at him with disgust. He also constructed a death mask and life-size effigy of her, which is essentially a sculpture of her, and lived with it until his passing on July 3rd, 1952. It was revealed that overlooking his corpse was a waxen image wrapped in silken cloth and a robe, which people believe was his creation of Maria, meaning Maria was with him even in his death. People have even rumored that he was found deceased in her arms. However, there are also some rumors that he had her real body and paid somebody to swap them. This case was so disturbing to research. I couldn't help but feel so bad for Maria because not only was she taken advantage of without consent, she was also put on public display for everyone to see her, and her perpetrator was never properly sentenced. There is a YouTube video on this case by the YouTube channel Well I Never. I've also linked that in the show notes along with other evidence on this case. Feel free to follow the podcast's Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast and my personal at Annalisa. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.